Hello, and welcome to episode 112 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. We are here today with Susan Kirk, Executive Director of Bethesda Cares. Susan, how are you doing today?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
Excellent. The first question I'd like to pose to you is, what are you currently doing, or what have you ever done to advance the public interest, and why?
Wow. Okay, that's like three parts. I think this is a good time to talk because Wednesday night was our annual point-in-time count that's mandated by HUD to identify the number of people still unsheltered.
And for our listeners, HUD is the Housing and Urban Development.
Right. Sorry.
Federal agency.
Washington.
Right.
Anagrams. And we here in Montgomery County are on our way to ending chronic homelessness, which is another little HUD subset of people that are homeless that might experience homelessness and then manage to escape it pretty rapidly. Chronic homeless are people that have disabilities and are long-term and usually more medically vulnerable than the rest.
Is there a difference between so there's chronic homeless and then there's a more acute homeless? And do you not pay it? Does Bethesda Cares only serve the chronically homeless and the acute homeless go somewhere else?
No, we serve whoever walks in our door, but our core, because we are outreach, and by outreach I mean we don't expect people to come to us, we go to them.
How do you find individuals who are suffering from chronic homelessness?
We find them in the streets, in the parks, through friends. People will tell us. We've campgrounds around here.
Wow.
They're close to 300.
Now, Bethesda is the most well-educated town in the United States, with half of all adults having a master's degree or higher, 3/4 of all adults having an undergraduate degree or higher, and the mean household income in Bethesda is about $124,000 a year. So in such a wealthy, well-educated community, one might assume, perhaps incorrectly, that homelessness isn't really an issue. Is homelessness an issue here?
Absolutely. We're named for where we serve, not necessarily who we serve, but there is definitely a core, and we've reduced the street homelessness by 85% in the past 6 years by housing people. That said, we still are working the White Flint sector, up in Rockville Pike. There are people that are living in the woods. There are people living behind businesses.
What's the magnitude of this problem?
I'm thinking for the quarter of the Rockville Pike quarter is probably about 40 people, but that's...
And what's your denominator? Is it the full 1 million in Montgomery County, or...?
That would be that's obviously the denominator.
Okay.
That's how we deal. But out of that, we go to people, we try to find them, and then build a relationship and trust, because if you think about it, most people that are living on the street because they don't trust, or they are paranoid and don't want to live inside or go inside, or have had really bad experiences, and so they're not going to seek help.
So what's the difference between Bethesda Cares and a homeless shelter?
We're a day program. Shelter usually implies overnight. We're a day shelter, if you will. We have a lobby, a drop-in center where people are welcome to come in and get out of the weather. There's always coffee on, and water and tea and oatmeal, and thanks to St. John's Episcopal Church, we're now serving cold breakfast because they're bringing in milk and cold cereal every morning and food. So the people that may not have had something to eat since yesterday's noon can come in and get something to eat. And there's a phone here where a mailing address for a lot of people that don't have or have home addresses.
And why would a mailing address be useful for a homeless person?
If you're homeless and people have no way of getting in contact with you, then it makes it really hard to apply for benefits, get in touch with your family, set up resources, and we want to make sure that we start bringing people in.
What kind of benefits might a homeless person be eligible for? Are you talking about food stamps and Medicaid, which is health insurance for the low income?
That's a start. Many of the chronic homeless are disabled, and so they probably qualify for Social Security, disability. We have, I hate to say we ended veterans homelessness. There's always going to be more coming into the system, but we have cleared out the backlog in 2015.
Oh, wow. What is that? The backlog of
veterans who are homeless.
Okay, so there are no homeless veterans in Montgomery County right now?
There are homeless veterans in Montgomery County, but we now have a system for once they come in, they get identified, and then there are pathways to housing for them immediately. So that they may be homeless, but it's not going to be like with the chronic, some of the people we serve have been on the streets for 20 and 30 years.
So how do you identify a location to place these people in? Do you own a bunch of real estate? Does someone who owns real estate donate this space? Are there state and federal subsidies? How do you get someone housed?
Very good question, because we don't have the keys, and that's always been our sticking point over the length of the time we've been in business. We can find people, we can build the trust, we can fill out the applications, but we don't have the final, or didn't have the final say. About 3 years ago, the system changed, which was wonderful. Instead of saying, I have an opening and had 20 people apply for that one opening, we now have a housing priority list. And everybody there's an intake form that does it's called the vulnerability index.
Yeah.
And that sort of, a way of sort of putting a number on how severe the medical vulnerabilities are of the person who should be in line to get housing first.
So the vulnerability is generally medical?
Generally medical, or it's physical or mental.
So does it? So medical includes two subcategories of physical or mental.
Correct.
So if somebody is sound of body, sound of mind, and unemployed and homeless on the street, they're a lower priority than someone who's unemployed, homeless on the street with schizophrenia.
Correct.
Okay.
And I would stretch that out because it sounds a little heartless, but that's not the case. If you look at it, chronic homelessness, if we took the 100% homeless, chronics are between 10 and 20%. They're a small minority, but they're the largest users of the system. We hate, you bring it down to economics. They're the ones that are using the police time. They're using the hospitals, the emergency rooms. They're spending nights in jail because they're out on the street. So the crimes of homelessness, where that other person you mentioned who may be homeless but sound of body and sound of mind probably could self-resolve it, or maybe just needs a little hand up or help along the way. And there's certainly lots of resources there for the rest of the continuum. It's the chronics that are the hard to serve.
You mentioned police and utilization of police and ambulance resources. If someone is homeless, presumably they don't have too much disposable income, and they may not have a cell phone, and they definitely wouldn't have a landline because they don't have a home. How are they able to even call 911?
Usually it's somebody else that calls 911. When we have people that are found unconscious on the street or in the metro station, the security guards will find them. And others, sadly, if they're in a campground, they may die overnight and nobody knows about it until somebody discovers the body.
So what else? So what are some of the greatest challenges facing Bethesda Cares right now? What are you trying to? You're trying to eliminate homelessness. What's your strategic pathway there?
The strategic pathway there was using how we ended veterans homelessness as our template of how you have to identify resources first instead of finding people and then waiting around for the housing to show up. We're actively searching out landlords, and we're looking for willing landlords that can work with us, and we provide resources and backup. So once we move somebody into housing, it's not like they're left on their own. We will go and support that person, because the leap, if you could think about it, if you've lived on the street for 20 years and you have not done grocery shopping, you haven't made, what's a grocery list? How do you pay a bill? All these things make it so much easier to say, I don't want this anymore. I'd rather be on the street. It's just too much pressure, and people walk away. So we assure the landlord that they will get their bills paid, they will get their rent, and they will be good tenants, because we will be there to help them and make that
So you would actually go to the location and help compile a grocery list, and how would they even have disposable income to pay for groceries?
That's where we go with the resources. You have to line up the resources, not only of the housing, but we have to line up either housing vouchers that are, like the old Section 8, it's now got some other number with it, but housing vouchers. If you're a veteran, there's VA vouchers.
And these are federal subsidies for rent. So if rent costs $1,000 a month, then the subsidy might be for $600 a month, so then they would end up only having to pay $400 for that month.
Correct. And then there are programs that are for people that have health problems, and there's several different housing programs here in the county, and the criteria differs, but basically it comes down to, at best, it's 1/3 of your income for housing.
So there's a number of other community nonprofits in Montgomery County. Do you
Correct.
ever partnership with Montgomery Housing Partnership or with Manna Food in order to get those groceries to the individuals and get those individuals in subsidized housing?
Yes, we work with, in fact, we're called the Continuum of Care, and we're outreach, so we're on the far side over there. There are people that run the shelters, there are people that run transitional housing, but and there are several agencies that run either housing programs, homeless programs. They work with HOC to manage some
What
of
is HOC?
I'm sorry, again, that anagram. It's the Housing Opportunities Commission, which is our public housing.
From what
For Montgomery
jurisdiction?
County.
From Montgomery County, the Housing Opportunities Commission.
And they also handle, they're the ones that handle the HUD vouchers and also have their own housing programs. So we work with a variety of the people that have the keys. We work with people that have the resources, so be it Manna, which the largest agency, or Nourish Now, or some of the other small, Bethesda Help has a food pantry. There's tons of resources out there, and it's us that our clients rely on to knit all of this together.
So it sounds like a very fragmented system and very difficult for a homeless person to negotiate, to navigate on his own, but also a very difficult landscape for even organizations to navigate, because there's so many different organizations and programs and vouchers with so many different levels of government and so many nonprofit organizations. Does it seem fractured and fragmented to you, and do you have any ideas on how to improve it?
We're working on it. You're right, it is fragmented. And I think it's probably, we were founded in 1988. You know, Shepherd's Table was founded maybe 1982. Manna was 87. And so we all started with our own little mandates, responding to and all of a sudden, 40 years later, 30 years later, you look and go, oh, well, why aren't we talking to each other? We should be working more closely together.
Yeah.
We know the resources, we know who we know, and now that's I can mention the continuum of care. That's the whole idea, is to identify the resources and set up partnerships and get rid of some of these silos so that there is easier traction.
So by silo, you mean that an individual, a homeless individual, let's call him Bob, may need to access 15 different programs and
Correct.
different organizations, and he would be responsible for coordinating, okay, I need to get food here and housing here, and I need to get a subsidy for my housing here. And what you say about breaking down silos is now some of those organizations may begin talking to each other to help coordinate the programs for Bob.
It's not quite that bad. That's what we do.
Okay.
We're client-centered. We don't have a program that somebody comes in here and has to fit and can only stay for X amount of time. We have the luxury of time based on the generosity of this community, that we can, if somebody is thinking about it but not really sure, they can come in and have coffee and just sort of scope us out for a couple of months. They may not want to talk to the guy, so they'll talk to the girl. And so we have, we're very low demand, and people come to us and start working on issues, and then they may take off, they may get arrested, whatever, and we don't see them for a couple of months, and then they come back, and we have to sort of rebuild that relationship again and start over.
Now, if they were arrested, they would find themselves, and if they were incarcerated, they'd find themselves indoors with heating in the winter with 3 meals a day.
Right.
Is that almost an improvement over being homeless?
In the streets, we call it 3 hots and a cot. And for some, yes, that's...
Is there a perverse incentive to get arrested?
For some, that's exactly what... it's more, and I'm going to categorize, which is probably not a safe thing to do, but we have a number of clients that come through the systems from childhood. You know, they were foster, they went to juvenile justice. The only structure in their life was institutions. And for them to be on the street, they know how to get around, but after a while, to get structure in their life, to get the food, to get organized, because they don't know how to do it themselves. There's an incentive to get arrested so that you can have somebody tell you what to do and have a bed to go to sleep in and food.
So would you say that is there a parallel system to the criminal justice system where I could go into a prison and leave when I wanted to and get those 3 hots and a cot, as you described them, without committing a crime? Is that what a homeless shelter is? And
Exactly.
are there enough slots for the individuals who need it?
don't run the shelters, so
Right.
I don't know, but I've heard from a couple of the guys that the emergency shelters, we have overrun hypothermia shelters. So the standard shelters are there during the winter for X number of people. When it's really, really cold or there's snow or whatever, they open up like the Regional Service Center over in eastern Montgomery County, the Executive Office Building, the Progress Place over in Silver Spring.
Yeah.
They use their floors and mats to get as many people inside as possible, but that doesn't necessarily mean everybody.
So, but an individual seeking structure would potentially commit a crime in order to go into prison and avoid. Why would they avoid these homeless shelters?
I'll back up one thing. It's not necessarily prison, jail.
Or jail is fewer than 365 days. Prison is 365 days or more.
18 months or more, and it's usually a higher level crime. The jail is more our guy's speed. That's
right.
And their crimes of being homeless, urinating in public, drinking in public, things like that. That if you had a house, you wouldn't be.
But if you have no bathroom that you can use,
exactly, then you're caught.
Right.
And
if you were to have a beer in your kitchen or your living room, that would be legal. But if you don't have a kitchen or living room and you're just out in a park, then that's the one place.
It's an open container violation. So, so you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. But yeah, so a lot of different things. Homelessness is a word that describes or covers up. I call it the Band-Aid. It covers up a lot of our society's broken safety net. And that can be from educational systems, the juvenile justice, the foster care. It tides over the lack of mental health services, the lack of identifying mental illness in children and young adults.
Yeah.
The average age of average onset of schizophrenia is 18 to 22. And so if you're in college or you're away, your parents might not pick it up, the school might not pick it up, and you just think you're having a bad adjustment problem or something.
Do you have any sense of whether homeless rates here, how homeless rates here in Bethesda, Montgomery County, Maryland, or the United States compare to homeless rates in other societies that do have stronger safety nets?
This is sort of going out on a limb. I do work with the European Network of Housing Researchers, and they actually have a homeless population there. It's interesting. There are public housing that is there, but they still have what they call rough sleepers. And I've read papers from people in Japan, from people, they will build a shelter to cover the winter months, and then they tear it down. It's sort of, Australia.
So there are homeless populations in every nation.
Correct.
Regardless of how strong a social safety net is.
I can't speak for Scandinavia or Denmark, but there are certainly, I know Scotland, England, Ireland all have rough sleepers. A lot of it has to do with, Dublin was reporting opioid scourge before we were seeing it, like 3 or 4 years ago. And so far, knock on wood, we have not seen that so much. I think Baltimore is beginning to see a rise in opioid.
So I'd like to transition a little bit away from Bethesda Cares more towards you, Susan Kirk. How is it that someone becomes involved in helping homelessness, that dedicates one's career? You've been here for 20 years, correct?
That's right.
And so how have you come to spend 2 decades of your life helping those in greatest need who are homeless, who are often overlooked by others in society? What leads one to this pathway? Especially, I see that you have a Master's of Business Administration. So what is it that someone with an MBA who could be qualified to do a lot, perhaps more highly remunerated work and elsewhere in society, ends up in this position?
You have to look a little deeper. My undergraduate degree is in social work and psychology.
Right.
And this was the perfect crossing. I've worked in corporations. I've worked in the public sector, or the private sector, most of my life, and always volunteered. So this is the perfect merger of doing my heart and being able to run a business at the same time. And basically that's what it is. It's still a business. It's not a bunch of do-gooders running around. We actually do have budgets and bottom lines to pay attention to, and our return on investment to our investors is the services we provide. We're not giving back little 35 cents per share type thing, but we will give back to the community a better place to live, if I put it that way, and
Even for those who aren't homeless?
even for those that aren't homeless. One of the overlooked things we talk about, the NIMBYism and
NIMBY, for our listeners, is not in my backyard.
And it's also the self-entitled, how dare you have these dirty people around me. For all that attitude, we are supported by over 54 congregations. We have area businesses and law firms that provide meals. They provide volunteers. They give their employees time off to help serve lunch. They do drives. There are a lot of good hearts here, and that needs to be recognized as well. That we often go to the self-absorbed, self-entitled, and actually there's a wonderful generosity in this county that needs to be held up a little bit more because they are wonderful.
So is a lot of the funding for Bethesda Cares from a diverse array of philanthropists?
Exactly. We like the basket, although I have to say we're past a year because of the veterans program. We've added more county funding. But generally, we like to carry it, and it's service organizations, businesses, congregations, individual donations, as well as foundations, grants, and state and local funding.
So you had been working in the private sector, and you'd been volunteering and you'd been volunteering with this particular population, or what is it that in particular? Because improving the world is wonderful, and everyone on the podcast does try to do that. But what in particular attracted you to the homeless population?
It's probably I backed into it. I think I was more interested in immigration and refugees, but then it sort of became very apparent that who are our refugees, who are our people that are displaced.
Interesting.
And
so these are the homeless are our own domestic refugees.
Correct. They don't have a place to go. They don't, and we don't have camps for them. Thank God. But it's tough, and we've made rules, and people have to obey their rules, and we try to flip it around to say that you are an adult. You deserve dignity. You can make your choices, and we will treat you as one. You don't have to. So we are low demand. We have very few rules, and basically the rules are being civil to each other and to us. And if you have trouble with the anger issues, you can take it outside and come back later. But we are here, and as long as you need it, and to think about us or scope us out, and before you want to trust us to do something with you, that's fine.
So as we approach the end of the podcast, I'd like to ask you a final question, which is to reflect upon your years here at Bethesda Cares and your years preceding your time at Bethesda Cares as a volunteer, and throughout the whole course of your life of public service, and take a moment to speak to our listeners about what it is that really has been motivating you and what you hope your legacy will be once you finish your career.
Ooh, legacy words. I don't think I'm ready for that one. I think what I find most is that I get more out of this than probably I give. And many volunteers say that, but it's really true, because when we work with people that have nothing, that they have such dignity, have a sense of humor about themselves, take the knocks and come back and try again. It's just incredible. It's, to me, awe-inspiring, and it's an honor to work with the population I do serve.
And that has been Susan Kirk, Executive Director of Bethesda Cares, who speaks about her time in public service as one that is incredibly altruistic, but is also very much self-fulfilling. She gains a lot, as many interviewees of Public Interest Podcasts, from what she gives. For Susan, finding a career that is intrinsically fulfilling is a great motivator that led her to be in her current position, and clearly she has been effective in reducing the size of the homeless population and addressing chronic homelessness, which, as she puts it, is a population of internal domestic refugees with great need, even in a wealthy, well-educated community. So, Susan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Jordan.
And this has been episode 112 of Public Interest Podcast with your host, Jordan Cooper, where we interview politicians, activists, advocates, and others who seek to improve the state of the world. Please remember to listen to us at publicinterestpodcast.com on iTunes or your podcast app on Apple products. You can ask Susan questions by leaving a voicemail through the Contact Us tab on the website, and we'll forward that over to her. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.